The house in Westlake Hills was less a home and more a monument to absence. Perched high above Austin, its panoramic windows framed the city's vibrant, pulsating life, a cruel contrast to the sterile silence within. It had been a year since laughter echoed in these halls. Now, the only sound was the faint hum of the climate control system pushing air through empty rooms. The decor was minimalist and immaculate, every surface of polished concrete and cold glass reflecting the pale winter light. It felt like a mausoleum, a place where memories were not cherished but entombed. Each designer chair, each piece of abstract art seemed chosen not for comfort or beauty, but to fill a space that had become overwhelmingly vacant. The material wealth was staggering, yet it offered no warmth, no solace, only a constant chilling reminder of the emotional bankruptcy that defined life inside its walls. In the center of this gilded cage sat Ethan Hayes. At 42, he was the picture of success, a titan of the Austin tech scene, dressed in a suit that cost more than most people's cars. But the fabric couldn't hide the hollows under his eyes or the permanent exhaustion etched into his features. His hair was perfectly styled, yet his gaze was lost, fixed on a stack of private investigation reports spread across his glass desk. For 365 days, this had been his ritual. He would trace the timelines, reread the witness statements, and stare at the grainy surveillance photos until the words blurred into meaningless shapes. He was a king in an empty castle, a man with the resources to move mountains who couldn't find the one thing that mattered. He was a father frozen in the moment his world had shattered, a ghost haunting the life he once built. The chime of the doorbell was a violent intrusion, a sound so out of place it made Ethan flinch. He ignored it at first, assuming it was a package, another meaningless acquisition for a life already overflowing with them. But the chime persisted. With a sigh of irritation, he rose and walked to the door. A motorcycle courier stood there, holding out a small, flimsy envelope with no return address. Inside, there was no typed letter, no formal document, just a single piece of notebook paper, crumpled and refolded many times. The handwriting was shaky, childish, the pencil strokes uneven. It contained only 2 short sentences, but they landed with the force of a physical impact. "I know where your son is. Meet me at the fountain near the Zilker Hillside Theater tomorrow at noon. Come alone." The world, which had been moving in slow motion, suddenly snapped into sharp, terrifying focus. The air left Ethan's lungs. The expensive reports on his desk, the product of a year of tireless work, suddenly felt like worthless paper. All the data, all the experts, all the money had led to nothing but dead ends and hollow condolences. Yet here, in his hand, was a crumpled note from a child that felt more real than anything he had seen in a year. A desperate, agonizing hope surged through him, a feeling so foreign he had forgotten its sting. It was immediately followed by a wave of ice-cold terror. Was this a trap? A cruel joke? His carefully constructed armor of numb indifference shattered, revealing the raw, primal desperation of a father. He would go. He had to. It's amazing how one small voice can break through the loudest silence. Subscribing to our channel is what allows us to continue bringing you these powerful accounts. The Zilker Park fountain was nearly deserted, its playful streams of water seeming to mock the heavy grey sky. Ethan arrived 20 minutes early, his heart a frantic drum against his ribs. Every passing car, every distant laugh, sent a jolt of anxiety through him. He felt exposed, a man stripped of his corporate armor, reduced to a single desperate hope. He scanned the faces of the few people wandering nearby, searching for a sign, a hint of recognition. But there was nothing. The world continued its indifferent rhythm, while his stood still. He clutched the crumpled note in his pocket, its fragile texture, the only tangible link to a possibility so terrifying and beautiful he could hardly breathe. He had managed empires from boardrooms, but here, on a cold park bench, he had never felt more powerless, more utterly at the mercy of the unknown. Then he saw her. She was standing near a large oak tree, half hidden, a small figure almost swallowed by the vastness of the park. It was a child, an 11-year-old girl maybe, with worn jeans and a faded hoodie pulled up over her head. A wave of bitter disappointment washed over Ethan. This had to be a prank, a sick, cruel joke played on a grieving father. He felt a surge of anger and was about to turn and walk away, to retreat back into the sterile safety of his empty house. But she took a hesitant step forward, and her eyes met his. They were large and dark, and held a depth of fear and resolve that stopped him cold. In that gaze, he saw not the mischief of a child playing a game, but the heavy burden of an old soul. She approached him slowly, her hands shoved deep into her pockets. Her voice, when she finally spoke, was barely a whisper, trembling with a fear that was palpable. "You're Leo's dad," she stated, not asked. Ethan could only nod, his throat too tight for words. She swallowed hard, gathering her courage. "He hums when he's scared," she said, her eyes fixed on the ground. "It's a little song, like a lullaby. He told me his mum used to sing it to him." The words struck Ethan with the force of a physical blow. It was a detail no one outside the family could know. A private, sacred memory of his wife, a secret melody shared between a mother and her son. In that moment, all skepticism, all doubt, evaporated, replaced by a raw, painful certainty. The girl was telling the truth. The memory ripped through him, sharp and merciless. He was back on that rain-slicked night, not at the scene, but in his office, the city lights twinkling below as he closed a multi-million-dollar deal. He remembered the triumphant handshake, the clink of celebratory glasses, while miles away, the world he had built was being torn apart. The phone call had come an hour later, a detached clinical voice informing him of an accident, his wife gone, his son missing. The guilt was a physical entity, a weight that had settled in his chest a year ago and never left. He hadn't been there to protect them. He had been chasing success, building an empire of glass and steel, while his real kingdom, the one of love and laughter, burned to the ground. Lily, for she had finally whispered her name, began to describe the place where Leo was being held. It was her own home. She spoke of the constant presence of strange, hard-faced men, relatives, and their associates who had fallen in with a local gang. She painted a bleak picture of her life on the east side, a world away from his Westlake Hills mansion. Her family wasn't evil, she tried to explain, just weak and scared, caught in a web of coercion they couldn't escape. Leo was kept in a back room, a small space with a single boarded-up window. She would sneak him food when she could, and listen to his quiet sobs at night. Her words were simple, unadorned, but they conveyed a landscape of fear and moral decay more vividly than any police report ever could. Ethan listened, his own pain momentarily eclipsed by the horror of this child's reality. He saw the unimaginable bravery it took for her to be here, to risk everything, for a boy she barely knew. "Why?" he finally managed to ask, his voice hoarse. "Why are you doing this?" Lily looked up at him, and for the first time, the fear in her eyes was replaced by a flash of defiance. "Because he's just a little boy," she said, her voice gaining a sliver of strength. "He misses his dad, and what they're doing, it's just wrong." The simple, profound clarity of her conviction cut through Ethan's year-long fog of grief and helplessness. Here was a child living in terror who still knew the difference between right and wrong and was willing to act on it. It was a lesson in courage from the most unlikely of teachers. It's truly incredible how a single act of courage can change everything, reminding us that there is still good in the world. Sharing these stories is why we do what we do. And every time you subscribe, you help us bring another voice out of the silence. Ethan looked at this small girl and felt a profound shift within him. His first instinct, the one honed by years of corporate strategy, was to call his lawyers, to alert the authorities, to unleash his immense resources, and let the system handle it. But as he looked at Lily's frightened face, he saw the fatal flaw in that logic. A clumsy, official intervention would be loud and slow. The gang would be tipped off, and what would happen to Lily? She would be seen as a traitor, left behind to face the brutal consequences. He realized his mission had just become infinitely more complicated. It was no longer just about rescuing his son. It was about protecting this brave little girl who had risked her life to give him hope. He couldn't save Leo and abandon her to the wolves. The thought was unacceptable. This realization was the start of a new kind of terror, but also a new kind of purpose. He had to trust her. He had to put the fate of his son, and now this girl, in a plan built on the word of an 11-year-old. It went against every calculated, risk-averse instinct he had. But looking into her determined eyes, he knew it was the only way. His heart, long dormant, was telling him to trust her in a way his brain couldn't comprehend. So he began to ask questions, his tone changing from that of a desperate victim to a quiet collaborator. He didn't interrogate her, he listened. He asked about the house, the layout, the number of men, their schedules. Lily, sensing the shift, answered with a precision that belied her age. She drew a crude map on a napkin from her pocket, marking doors, windows, and the location of Leo's room. She described the dog in the backyard that barked at everything, and the loose floorboard in the hallway that everyone avoided. These were the details of her prison, and she was handing him the keys. A fragile, unspoken alliance formed between them, a bond forged not in affection, but in a shared, high-stakes desperation. The external dangers were immense. Lily explained that the gang had eyes and ears all over the neighborhood. Strangers were noticed immediately. A police car cruising the block would be an instant red alert. The operation had to be silent, surgical, and completely off the books. The bureaucracy he had once trusted now seemed like a lethal impediment, a slow-moving machine that would crush both children in its gears. The weight of it all pressed down on Ethan. For a year, he had been paralyzed by the fear of his past failure. Now, he was faced with the terrifying prospect of a new one. One wrong move, one miscalculation, and he would lose not just his son, but this innocent child as well. Despite the crushing fear, a strange sense of clarity began to settle over him. For the first time in a year, he wasn't just reacting to his tragedy, he was planning to overcome it. He took Lily's napkin map, his mind, so adept at navigating complex business systems, now focused on this single, vital objective. He started to see a path, a narrow, dangerous corridor through the chaos. He would need to use his resources, not with brute force, but with stealth and precision. He explained his initial thoughts to Lily, speaking to her not as a child, but as an equal partner in this conspiracy of hope. He saw her nod, her expression serious, her mind processing the risks alongside him. As the afternoon light began to fade, casting long shadows across the park, Ethan knew what he had to do. He looked at Lily, this small, shivering girl who held the key to his entire world. He made a promise, his voice low but steady, a vow that sealed their pact. "I'm going to get you both out," he said. "I'm going to get you and Leo out of there, and I'm going to make sure you're safe. I promise." In that moment, he was no longer the hollow man in the glass house. He was a father again, not just to the son he had lost, but to the daughter he had just found. The fight wasn't over, it was just beginning, and for the first time in a very long time, Ethan Hayes was ready to fight. The darkness on the east side was different, thicker than the manicured shadows of Westlake Hills. It was a living thing, clinging to the peeling paint of the small houses and pooling in the overgrown yards. Ethan moved through it with a silence he didn't know he possessed. his expensive shoes making no sound on the cracked pavement. Every instruction Lily had given him played on a loop in his mind. The squeaky third step of the porch, the window in the back with the broken latch, the dog that was always tied up after midnight. He wasn't a tech titan anymore. He was a ghost, an infiltrator. His entire being narrowed down to a single, terrifying purpose. The fear was a cold knot in his stomach, but for the first time in a year, it was a productive fear, a fuel that sharpened his senses and focused his will. He was no longer a man reacting to a tragedy. He was a father fighting his way back from it. He found the window exactly where she said it would be. The wood swollen and soft with rot. It slid open with a low groan that sounded like a scream in the oppressive quiet. Inside, the house smelled of stale cigarette smoke and unwashed laundry, a scent of neglect that was a world away from his sterile, air-conditioned mansion. He navigated the cramped hallway, his hand brushing against flimsy walls, his foot carefully avoiding the loose floorboard Lily had marked on her napkin map. He felt like a trespasser in someone else's misery. A dim light from a street lamp filtered through a dirty kitchen window, illuminating the path to a closed door at the end of the hall. His heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic, desperate rhythm. Behind that door was either the end of his suffering or the beginning of a new, unbearable chapter of it. He turned the knob with excruciating slowness. The room was little more than a closet, dark and airless. A small form was huddled on a thin mattress on the floor, wrapped in a threadbare blanket. It was Leo. He was smaller than Ethan remembered, his frame thin and fragile under the faint light. The boy looked up, his eyes wide with terror, a silent gasp forming on his lips. Ethan crossed the room in 2 strides and knelt, his own breath catching in his throat. He reached out a trembling hand, touching his son's cheek. "It's over, son," he whispered, the words thick with a year of unshed tears. "Dad's here. We're safe now." Leo collapsed into his arms, a shuddering, silent sob shaking his small body. In that embrace, the weight of 1,000 sleepless nights and a million what-ifs finally lifted from Ethan's shoulders, replaced by the simple, profound reality of holding his child again. Their escape was not as silent as their entry. A floorboard creaked under Ethan's weight as he carried Leo, and a light flickered on in the main room. A man stumbled out, his face a mask of sleepy confusion that quickly hardened into angry recognition. It was one of the men from Lily's description, her uncle. He lunged, not for Ethan or Leo, but for the small figure who had appeared in the hallway behind them. He grabbed Lily by the arm, his voice a venomous hiss. "You little traitor," he snarled, his grip tightening. "What did you do?" For a terrifying second, the old Ethan, the one who would delegate and strategize, watched the scene unfold. But that man was gone. This was a father, a protector, whose world had just been put back together and would not be shattered again. Without a moment of hesitation, Ethan shifted Leo into one arm and stepped directly between the man and the terrified girl. He didn't say a word. He didn't have to. His body was a shield, his gaze an unbreakable wall of pure, cold fury. He stood over Lily, protecting her with the same ferocious instinct he protected his own son. The uncle faltered, seeing not a wealthy mark, but a man with absolutely nothing left to lose and everything to fight for. He let go of Lily's arm and backed away. In that chaotic, terrifying moment, under the dim light of a squalid hallway, a new family was forged. It wasn't one of blood or name, but one born of shared trauma and a father's sudden, fierce, and absolute love for the 2 children now huddled safely behind him. The aftermath was a blur of flashing lights and quiet, professional voices. Once the authorities had taken the men, including Lily's uncle, into custody, a heavy silence fell. Lily was left in a void, a ward of a system that had no immediate answers for a child whose family had just imploded. Ethan found her sitting on a hard plastic chair at the police station, looking impossibly small, a solitary island in a sea of bureaucratic indifference. He saw in her the same lost, frightened child he had just pulled from that dark room, and he recognized that his mission was not yet complete. He had gone to find one child and had come back with two. The law saw a complex case file, but Ethan saw the brave little girl who had rebuilt his world. He knew, with a certainty that transcended all logic, that leaving her behind was not an option. His home was empty without his son, but it would be just as empty without her. The house in Westlake Hills began to breathe again. While the slow, methodical process of Lily's adoption got underway, the sterile monument to grief transformed into a home. The oppressive silence was shattered by the sound of laughter echoing down the hall, the thump of a soccer ball against an outside wall, and the quiet murmur of two children sharing secrets late at night. Fingerprints appeared on the panoramic windows, and colorful, messy drawings were taped to the gleaming refrigerator door. Ethan found himself finding joy in the simple chaos, the vibrant mess of a life being lived. Leo and Lily, two souls bound by a shared nightmare, became each other's anchor. They navigated their trauma together, forging a siblinghood more profound than blood, healing in the warmth of a home that was finally, truly, a sanctuary. Ethan's transformation extended beyond the walls of his house. The man who once measured his life in quarterly earnings and market acquisitions now saw wealth as a tool for something more. He could not forget the year of helpless agony he had endured, and he knew countless other families were still trapped in that same darkness. Channeling his grief into purpose, he established the Leo and Lily Foundation, a non-profit organization designed to provide the kind of immediate, agile, and privately funded assistance that the system so often failed to deliver. He poured his formidable energy and resources into it, building a network of investigators and support staff who could act decisively. He was no longer building an empire of code and capital. He was building a legacy of hope, a testament to the idea that from the deepest pain, a powerful purpose could be born. Years later, standing in the sunlit entryway of his home, Ethan watched Leo, now a lanky teenager, playfully argue with Lily as they packed her car for her first year of college. They were his children, whole and happy, their futures bright and full of promise. The hollow man from the glass house was gone, replaced by a father whose heart had been broken open only to be filled with a love more expansive than he had ever known. He had learned that true family is a choice, a fierce and deliberate act of love built in the face of adversity. Seeing their journey from darkness to light is a powerful reminder of what's possible. We are deeply thankful for every single person who subscribes, as your support is what gives us the strength to continue sharing these testaments to the human spirit.